Thank you everyone for coming. This is Carly here from PS Group, and this is the Behind the Mic Unwrapping Adult Podcast webinar. So this is what we're going to be covering today. Obviously, we're mid-introduction, and then I'm going to be introducing our illustrious guest speakers today, who are all podcast hosts themselves, and I'm very excited. Jamiroquai, my dog, is not a podcast host, but he's working on his blog. Now, we're going to cover who is an ideal guest from the perspective of a host. When you're on a podcast, what are those best practices? Like, how do you have a successful show? We're going to cover why you should even start your own podcast. What are the benefits of it? The tips and tricks for creating a show. We're going to dive into how the hell not to go broke while you're making a show by monetizing it, the different ways you can make money through the show itself, how to create a media kit, and then, of course, a big ass Q&A at the end. So you will have the opportunity to ask questions of all guests, and I'm really excited to dive in. So here is our little introduction. PS Group, for those of you who don't know, is a creative marketing agency specifically for the adult industry. The vast majority of us are sex workers, and we work exclusively with sex workers and adult brands. These are the services we offer: branding, strategy, websites, logos. We've just added a lot of social media management. We do copywriting, video editing, SEO, and email marketing. So we do a lot here. But we're not a one-stop shop. We do not offer fan or clip site management, which is something that's a little different. A lot of people come to us for that. Happy to refer you to others, but we kind of focus on the creative elements. Now, I would love to kick off with a very exciting introduction to Ms. Sinn Sage. She, her is
they.
I apologize. She, they. Because you're kind of like the Eustatus or the Sue, right?
I'm everything and nothing all at once.
She is the amazing host of Sage Advice with Sinn Sage. She is a 20-year industry vet. She is a multiple award winner, including an AVN Hall of Fame inductee. She has her own studio imprint and produces content. I'm going to skip the next one because we're going on YouTube. Then we've got, she is a big educator, public speaker. She is a huge advocate for sex workers, for LGBTQIA rights. Basically, she's just really amazing for promoting human equality. She's also a cat lover, which I recently discovered. So, Sinn, is there anything else you would like to add to that, in addition to your recent movie premiere?
Oh, yeah, I just came out with Sinn's Trans Lesbian Lovers 2. So just released this month. So, you can get that at sin-sage.com. And I think now or soon it'll be on whatever, like the Empire, and you can buy it there too.
Coming soon to a movie theater near you.
Right. But yeah, everything else, that's a really wonderful intro, and I appreciate it.
Well, we're thrilled to have you. So moving on to Ms. Steph Sia, Steph, of the amazing podcast Strip by Sia. She has been nominated twice for her podcast by AVN. She is a pole instructor, dancer, content creator, cam model. Steph, you just won a big award for your dancing, didn't you?
I did. I did win the title category for pole drama in Pole Theater Canada just 2 weeks ago. And
Wow.
yeah, it was exciting. That's over though.
Similarly, Steph is a big advocate. She is a board member of a number of organizations, as well as a frequent lecturer at education institutions, including her alma mater. She is a PS Group brand strategist. So if you want to work with Steph, give us a shout. And she's a big chef and a noodle enthusiast. So, Steph, is there anything you would like to add to that or plug or
Oh
anything?
my gosh. I mean, that was fantastic. Thank you for like hyping me up. No, that you nailed it. Thank you so much for the warm welcome, Carly.
Well, we're very excited to hear what you have to share with us. Last but not least, is Ellis Hendrix. She, her, is the illustrious host of the Exclusively Yours podcast, which, as I understand, just made the leap from audio exclusively to video. You can check that out on YouTube at Ellis Hendrix. She is a 7+ year vet of full service. She is also a PS Group brand strategist. So if you are an in-person worker and would like to refine your branding and strategy with Ellis, please give us a shout. She is also an avid blogger and world traveler. She has a Substack. She's just really, really busy. So, Ellis, would you like to add anything?
I think that's good for me.
And she rocks a red lip. Let's
Yeah.
be honest. Okay, so at this point, I am going to turn it over to Ms. Sage to tell us about what you typically look for when you are booking guests.
All right, so yeah, I just, real quick, I know I only have like 15 minutes, so I'll just say real quick. I started my podcast because I was a guest on a lot of podcasts. There's about a year that I had a PR representative and they were booking me on a lot of podcasts. And I'd have to do my makeup for these podcasts, and they might be 15 minutes to maybe an hour. They would ask the same very boring, very bland and frustrating questions of me. And I just felt like it wasn't a great use of my time. I don't feel like I was really being promoted in a way that mattered. And also that I feel like we as sex workers have so many interesting stories to tell and insights and viewpoints, and none of that was coming through when I was guesting on other podcasts. So I said, I can do this better. And if all these are established podcasts that are kind of popular, I know I can make something that's more interesting and more insightful into our industry for people who are not in it. So I got in touch with, it was actually my PR rep that I was on their podcast, and their producer, his name is Matt, and he produces a bunch of podcasts. So I just talked to him separately, and I was like, I'm interested in making one. And essentially it was just down to me booking guests, and then he would record it and edit everything. Like, so he does everything, and I pay $75 an episode plus $20 to make the ad mat. But I was able to get it rolling, and I learned a lot in the first, maybe 5 or 10 episodes. I was like, okay, now I think I understand more what I want the podcast to be about. It kind of comes together, you stumble yourself into the stream that takes you down the road. So, so that's briefly like how I got involved and how I actually got mine started. And I started figuring out pretty quickly what kinds of guests I need. Because at first I'm like literally just asking people who are my friends. And then I'm realizing that just because they're my friend doesn't mean that they understand how to be the best guest on a podcast. So the first thing I have here is talkative. This is like if you are the type of person who sits there and doesn't really engage in conversations with other people, you're not going to be a very good podcast guest. I need people who are engaging. It's difficult if I ask you a question that's meant to sort of launch you out into more conversation. But then you give me like a 1 sentence answer and then stop talking, like with a period at the end of that sentence. And then I'm like, there's space, and I'm okay. Do you have more to say about that? Like, I have to be the one that's constantly like pulling it out of you. That makes it really challenging and can make the podcast come across kind of clunky and awkward. So if you're going to be a guest, make sure that you are used to talking and you have stuff to say. So have a voice and stories to share. Like, I guess maybe it's kind of like when you see celebrities go on late night shows, they always bring a couple of stories to tell. So it depends on what type of podcast you're guesting on, but hopefully, you could think back on all of your experiences in the industry. This also goes to the next one, unique experiences. Like, definitely you as an individual sex worker have had stories and things happen to you, and engagements with the industry and the various portals you could take in the industry, that people are curious to hear about. They're curious to know about. You have to think about the listeners of podcasts as essentially being civilians. Like, all they know is what they've seen on TV or represented in movies. And we know that's not often a very accurate representation of our lives or our experiences in our work. So you need to be that, bring that to the audience. And they are fascinated to hear about it. And also, on top of just satiating sort of their curiosity, we're also informing them of things about our lives that they have no idea about when it comes to politics, when it comes to laws, legislation. They don't know. They don't know, for example, that we pay our taxes and yet banks don't want to take us as clients. Like, we need to make people aware of this type of thing. So that's just like one idea of something. Think about what you're passionate about when it comes to your role in the industry, and hopefully have stories and experiences to discuss about that. Same, that also is like the diversity. What we do is totally different than what anybody's ever conceived of, like I was saying. So make sure that you're expressing all of that. You have this expertise in sex work just because you are in sex work. Like, you have so much knowledge about what you do and what your lived experience is, and people want to hear that. And it doesn't always all have to be positive. I think there's enough negativity going around about the industry. Of course, I don't feel like we want to pile onto that. Like, that's there. People can find it. But I think talking about how a job doesn't necessarily have to be perfect for you to still have the job. That's just like one element or one example of having that relevant expertise. Study up on it if you need to. If you're like, I know this, but I'm going to go online and read about other people's just to sort of verify what I know, and to have more examples for the stories that you're telling. But the last two things, reliable and timely communication. This is huge for me. I know that I have some people where my only way to reach out to them is their Twitter, right? So I'll tweet at them, or sometimes they've even tweeted at me, and they're like, oh, I'm interested in being on your podcast. And then I DM them and I'm like, hey, can we get this going? Like, da 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 da, I'd love to have you on. And they might answer once or twice and then completely ghost, and I never hear from them. If I've also had it where someone literally did that, and so I scheduled them on, and the day of, it's not just me sitting down at my computer. It is my producer who lives somewhere else. We have to coordinate time-wise. So when we sit down and he's blocked out these 2 hours of his day, as have I, and you don't show up, like, and I'm messaging you and you're like, oh my God, sorry, can we reschedule? I'm like, the day of? Like, I'm sitting here ready to start and now you want to reschedule with me? Like, so I've done it to where it's like, okay, this one time, yes, because I'm a human being and I understand shit happens. But then for it to happen a second time, it's like, I I'm not going to have you as a guest on my podcast now. Like, because this is, it's just about respecting my time as a professional. And I understand that people do have stuff happens and that they're like, they wake up and they're like, I don't feel like doing it today. I get that. But at the same time, I am a person and I have tons of responsibilities, and I have scheduled and blocked this time out for you for no money. Like, I'm not making anything. This is just promo for me. It's promo for you. Like, so we need to respect each other's time, and the fact that there are multiple people involved in this, that's important. So if you make plans with someone, it's one thing if you're sick, but you have to let them know before the morning of. You have to give them adequate time, because there are other things that we can do to make money or to promote ourselves with the time that we blocked out for you. So that is a huge thing. Being on time is less so. I'm a person who tends to be late, but if you're going to be more than an hour late like that, now I have to coordinate with my producer and all this other stuff. So it's, when it's reliable, when it's timely communication, it's like, I need to hear back from you. This also goes to PR reps, because I booked someone through a PR rep, and she got the time wrong, the PR rep. So I was like, okay, now give me a half an hour, because that's the time we said. Then I show up and the guest has no idea of what my podcast is about, even though I sent the whole little thing, which is something else I recommend, have a little write-up that'll be on the next slide, I believe. Yeah. But I sent that to her, all the information, and she did not get it, because much like an agent, they're not great at doing their job. You pay them a stupid amount of money and then they drop the ball. So just make sure you know about that stuff. Now, the size of following is a factor. Yes, I have had days where someone canceled on me last minute and I had the block scheduled. So I'm like, can I just get someone in here? I'm so busy the rest of the month. I have to have this many. So I tweeted out like, who's available today or tomorrow or whatever, like can fill in the spot. And honestly, I'm going to be looking at the follower counts, because if someone writes me like, I'd love to be on your podcast, but it's like, maybe they only have 1,000 followers or a couple hundred followers. It's just, I'll put you on my list as someone who's interested, because maybe you do have good stories and great insights and stuff like that. But ultimately, this is about promotion, getting the message out, getting the word out, all of that stuff. So yeah, I want the guest who I'm having to bring listeners to my podcast in the same way that I want my podcast to bring you more followers or customers and clients and stuff like that. That's just the fact of it. So maybe if your follower count on Twitter is low, maybe you have a really high follower count on Instagram, but you have to tell me about that stuff and do what you can to get more followers. I would say, make sure. So again, this goes back to what I was talking about with the PR thing. Make sure you know what date it is, you know what time it is. Make sure you know what time it is in your time zone. I screwed up yesterday. I had put 4 in my calendar, and it was 3 for me. It was 4 for my guests who were on the East Coast. So I was like a half hour late, and I was all, it affects the podcast too if you're late. I was like shaky the whole time. I was just like trying to speed through and felt like I was in a hurry on the podcast, even when I wasn't. So that's important stuff to know. And of course, we all make mistakes from time to time. How long is it going to be? I have my guests block out 2 hours of time. Usually it only takes about an hour and 20 minutes, maybe an hour and a half, but like, I want to make sure that they don't have anything they've got to rush off to in that period of time. So make sure that you know, that your guest knows, all of that stuff. Make sure they are aware of what the topics are going to be, what the questions are you going to ask them, the general like format of your show. I was on somebody's show once and they do a little phone sex skit in the beginning of it. That was important for me to know so that I knew what to expect. Oh, I'm going to be expected to do this little sort of skit beforehand. I was nervous about it. It was super fucking easy and it took like 3 minutes. So, but that's just an example that you want them to understand. I need my guests to understand that we're going to talk for a while and then they're going to answer 2 advice questions. It's an advice podcast, right? So just make sure they understand what to expect as a guest. And if you are the guest, make sure you understand what's expected of you. And if you need to do any research, like when I was on Steph's podcast, she wanted talking points from me. She wanted to know, I was like, let's talk about this activist kind of stuff. And she's like, I want to know exactly what those things are going to be. So I had to go and do a little bit of research, and I had to think about it beforehand. What are the topics about this that I want to be talking about? So there's like a framework on her end. Is it going to be video or audio only? This is really important for me. I make mine audio only because I got tired of having to do my makeup every time I was on a fucking podcast. I want to just be able to be a troll, okay? But that's for me, and I want my guests to not feel like they have to spend an hour getting ready beforehand just to appear on camera. This is how it is for now. If I have to make stuff on camera later for like a Patreon or some other reason, that might be in the future, but this is important for people to know. Like, say that right off the bat. Are they going to be using video? Because then they have to decide if what they want to look like on camera. Same thing with the tech equipment needs. I don't require, but I do ask for a mic and headphones. But is it going to sound okay? Like, this is really important. And also for mine, I need you to have a laptop or a PC computer. Some people, tablets and phones are fine for what my little studio uses and what my producer uses. It has to be a laptop. We tried it on the phone once. It was absolutely terrible. I'm sure he spent like 5 hours just editing out all of the connective issues we were having. So that stuff is really important for people to know. I've sent a microphone to someone before. It's like $10 on Amazon. So just make sure that your guest knows, or you know as the guest. It has to be quiet. Gosh, I've had podcasts where like people's boyfriends or partners or dogs or pigs, even like their pets, needed to be fed, or the boyfriend walked around and just like was so disrespectful that his partner was doing a podcast and just like opening things and cracking ice and just like not giving a shit. So if that is a possibility, make sure that you are in a different room, avoiding those sorts of things. Just be mindful of that stuff. Set up your space. I always make sure I've got my sparkly water. Like if you need a snack, if you need a vape, some people vape, like have that all here so you're comfortable. Pee first. You know, I say pee first. If it's not live, you're probably fine. I often have to go pee in the middle of my podcast, but it gets edited out. It's fine. Just make sure you're ready to go for however long the podcast is to sit at your desk. Same thing. Yeah. Any pre-show rituals. Make sure that we can hear you speaking. I had some people that I knew that I was like, maybe this would be a good person to have on my podcast. We're interacting in real life, and they are mumbling constantly. And I am like, I'm glad we had this interaction, because you would be absolutely terrible on the podcast. So yeah, make sure you're not speaking too quickly or stumbling through your words. This is like an audio medium, so obviously the way you sound is important. Be engaged. I say whether you're on camera or not, I use video still because I want to make eye contact with the person that I'm talking to. I want to see their face so we don't stumble over each other and stuff like that. But also, it really does help you sound engaged when you are engaged. So that also goes back to picking up the conversation and carrying it along. That to me is engagement, right? Not just these very short answers without any descriptions going along with them. So yeah, same, expanding on the responses. Just have something to say and keep the conversation going. And ultimately, yeah, just remember we are on each other's podcasts to promote ourselves, to promote the other person. So as the guest and as the host, either way, you are all promoting each other. So if you're a guest, please make sure that you're paying attention to when that podcast comes out. I know I tweet about it every time. I'm sure everybody tweets about it every time. I put it on all my platforms. So make sure you notice that, and please retweet it. Like, it's also your job to participate in that promotion and that engagement. It's a mutually beneficial thing. So, and I feel like so much in our industry is not about getting it all for me. It's about sharing with each other, and we all thrive when we do promote each other. And there's just more than enough to go around in this business. It does not need to be competitive. That's like a huge thing. So I say never think of it as like I need to only promote myself and my stuff. Think of it as like the more we promote each other, the more we're sharing the goods and the clients and the customers and all of that stuff. So
Does anyone have any questions about that incredible overview about being a great guest? Ellis, Steph, is there anything you would like to add to that topic?
Yeah, I definitely would agree with this is a mutual thing. It's a mutual understanding. We want to market ourselves, but also we want to market and uplift you guys as well. And of course, like the timely thing, I cannot stress it enough. I'm at the point where I actually don't even reschedule guests that bail on me anymore because it's not
yes.
worth my time. And as sex workers, you guys should know that time is money. So please don't waste my time. So
Yeah, big
stay on
one.
that.
Mhm.
Absolutely. Ellis, is there anything you'd like to pop in there?
I would also say, because I've had people sneak into my inboxes, and I'm not sure if either of you have, where people are like, basically like, you need to interview me as a guest. I say, please don't do that.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't like,
I'll leave it at that.
yeah, when anybody on Twitter or when anybody on the internet starts a sentence to me that says you should, immediately like my little spikes come out and I'm like, I should what? Like, don't tell me what I should do. There are better ways to approach suggestions, making suggestions to people.
Yeah,
Or at
absolutely.
least pitch
I would
yourself
agree
if
with that.
you want to be on the show. Like pitch yourself with talking points and
Yes.
like talk to me and like convince me why you should be on my show.
Yes. Or like, I love your podcast. I'd love to be involved. Can I be a guest? Like,
Yeah.
here's all the reasons why I would be a good guest. That's a wonderful way.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
Chloe here does have a question. She asked, as a guest, should you personally be preparing a direction that you'd like the podcast to go?
So, for example, with Sia's podcast, she said to me, like, show me the direction. What have you got? Essentially, like, what do you got for me? You know, what do you want? Because I reached out to Sia. I saw her podcast and I was like, oh, can I be a guest on your podcast? And she was like, tell me, essentially, with asking for the talking points, like, what direction do you want to take this? So, in that sense, I did have to prepare. Example, my podcast, it's very much more conversational. So I would say, like, have an idea in your head of sort of the things that you're passionate about. Hopefully you've listened to my podcast at least once so you can see sort of the directions I tend to take with people. But beyond that, I say it is catered more toward the podcast itself. So in my experience, when I was getting booked on all these sort of half-assed ones, or that's my interpretation, it was very much like they were going to take the controls and they were going to pull me along and they're going to ask me questions and I'm going to answer them. And that's the direction it's going to go. But mine is sort of that middle ground where it's like, I do like to talk about sex worker issues, queer issues, things of that nature. I want to know your story, where you came from, stuff like that. So just having those things in mind. But like with Sia's, it's a lot more like, tell me where we're going to go with this and make sure you know about these topics that you want to talk about. So yeah, maybe what the answer that I'm getting around to is that it's very customized to the podcast you're going to be on. Would y'all agree?
Yes, definitely. Because my podcast is primarily on destigmatization, advocacy, and activism, and uplifting sex workers. So, like, I really want to make sure that we are aligned with that and we're on the same page. I very much stray away from very general podcasts, and those are the ones that the PR groups like to send to me. And I'm like, I need to know something else beyond what I can Google from you from the internet. Yeah.
I would actually add one thing that I've always found both challenging and yet extremely helpful is having your own elevator pitch. Like prepared, you know it, you know in advance what you want to promote and how you want to present your brand.
Yeah. Like, be your brand.
I think we're gonna hop on to Ellis is gonna cover all about if you are one of those gluttons for punishment, or ambitious folks how to start your own show and why you should do it.
All right. So why you should start a podcast. Basically, the 3 reasons for me and for anybody else. You have your brand building, like we just talked about. So that was a great segue into this section. You are the brand, you are the figure. So that's a great way to establish who you are in whatever industry you're in, be it in person or online. Secondly, engagement and connection to your fans and to people who are not yet your fans, but could be your friend, could become your fans. And third, it is the most important one, especially for me, is low barrier or entry or overhead. So it basically virtually costs nothing to start a podcast. You can start a podcast with a cell phone and wired headphones and free podcast software. So those are the 3 reasons why you should start a podcast. So moving on to your checklist of how you start your podcast, you want to first plan your podcast. So you want to identify your topic, your format, your frequency, and your audience. So your topic, what do you want to talk about? Format, do you want to do it solo? My podcast started as a solo podcast. You can do like a storytelling podcast if you'd like to, or you can also do an interview style podcast, which these 2 also do. Frequency, how often do you want to release your podcast? Do you want to release it weekly, bi-weekly, monthly? I know for me, I don't have a frequency. I just do it whenever I feel like it, when the mood strikes me. I know that's not the best thing, but you know, it works for me. I'm kind of lazy. I'm not making any money off of my podcast, which luckily we'll learn how to monetize your podcast later. So that works for me. And then your audience, who are you talking to? Are you talking to your potential clients? Are you talking to your online fans? Are you talking to other sex workers? Are you talking to civilian people? Are you talking to everyone? So next we have your setup. You have your equipment and your environment. Equipment, we're going to be real basic here. We're going to talk about headphones, wired headphones mostly, and your USB microphone, which I don't have my microphone now, but it's like, right, it's here that you can't see it. A lot of people start off with like super cheap equipment. You don't have to have anything really expensive, and I wouldn't suggest investing into anything expensive until you're like further on down the line and you figure out that you really want to pursue this and actually be consistent with it. So environment, like we touched on earlier, as a guest, make sure you're in a quiet space. Usually it's supposed to be like an enclosed space, so you don't have like a crazy echo. Let's see what else. Software, free versus premium. Okay, so you've got free software. I started my podcast. I used GarageBand to edit my podcast in the beginning. It was pretty easy because I didn't have like really long episodes in the beginning, and I didn't really have guests. So that was easy. And if I did have guests, we did it in person. So that was pretty easy. I believe there's another software called Audacity. Premium though, if you want to upgrade, I think is definitely worth it in the long run, because a lot of premium software, you won't have to pay somebody else to do it. You can just do it yourself, which is what I do right now. Some of the software that I use allows me to interview my guest remotely, and then I can go back and edit everything, and I can usually do it within an hour or so, or however long I want to take. So your content, now that you have whatever you want to talk about, your topics, you need to outline your content about, let's see. If you have your interview guests, what I do for my guests, I usually say, hey, what do you want to talk about? I have an idea of what we want to talk about, and then I'll write out an outline for them to follow through so that there are no surprises. And occasionally I do like to throw a surprise in there because it's fun just to record. Nothing too crazy, but I'll send an outline to my guest of what we're going to discuss, basically. So there's no surprises and everyone is super comfortable. It's basically like a conversation. And if you want to write a script, which some people do, you can always write a script, and you can most definitely use AI to help you. That's a good tip and trick. And then when you want to go set up your recording, if you're going to record by yourself, make sure you're in a quiet space. You have all of your equipment. And if you're with a guest, like we touched on earlier, what I tell my guests is that they must have a cell phone or a laptop and headphones. And then also a thing, if you do use your cell phone, make sure you have it in do not disturb, and make sure that your wireless connection or your wherever you're using Wi-Fi is a strong connection. Post-recording checklist. Let's see where we're at. Hosting. Yes. You also want to, once you've recorded everything, you want to figure out where you're going to host and publish your podcast. So let's see. One that I will touch on is Anchor, but now it is called Spotify for podcasters. That is where you can host and publish your podcast one place. And then after we've hosted and published it, you're going to submit it to directories. So you've got Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, all those things where you listen to podcasts. And let's see, then you're going to promote your podcast. So I'm going to promote it. Your guest or whoever is going to promote it, if you do have a guest, as we touched on earlier, make sure you engage with your audience. Tell them to listen and rate and recommend it to somebody who may also want to find that information helpful or who could listen to it. It's also good to just promote it everywhere. Twitter, Instagram, websites, anywhere you can think of promoting it. Substack, your blog, your own personal website, if you have one. Just make sure you engage. Also ask for 5-star reviews. When you leave reviews for a podcast, that helps other people find it, especially on Apple Podcasts, I believe, and Spotify. So after you've done all of this stuff, make sure you monitor it and you can improve it as you go along on your journey to starting your podcast. Does anybody have any questions? I see somebody said Reddit. Oh yeah, Reddit is a good one, but I'm not a Reddit person.
I wanted to add to promote, I also got someone who, like, I spent a little time with him, sending him a picture, coming up with the colors that I wanted to make a little graphic. And so I ask each guest for a photo, to send me a photo that they want me to use, a safe for work photo. And then I send it to him and he inputs it into the little graphic and changes every episode, the name of the guest, their Twitter handle, so that I take that one little picture for every episode and I can post it. I pin it to my Twitter, I pin it to my Instagram, I post it on TikTok, I post it on Reddit, or I send it to the person that does my Reddit. I even put it on Blue Sky. So it's like, if you just have a little picture, you can, it makes it really easy to promote the podcast.
Absolutely. I would add email marketing.
Yes.
Mhm.
I would add email marketing, because that way also you can track who is going there. And if you guys need help with graphics, obviously we can help you with that. But Chloe had a great question. How important is good sound quality from good equipment? And do you receive feedback from listeners, or is it kind of irrelevant for listeners themselves?
If you sit down and listen to it and you can't stand the way it sounds, I'm pretty sure other people can't stand the way it sounds. So it is important.
Yes.
But it doesn't have to break, you don't have to break the bank for it to sound.
I was gonna say, like, it doesn't have to be this top of the line equipment. You do your own editing, so you probably know that better than me, but I feel like in editing there's ways of just cleaning it up too. So like, you don't need a $300 microphone at all. Like,
Absolutely not. No, you do not need it, but your sound quality is important. I think the most important thing is just to make sure that you have no interruptions and you're in a quiet place.
Mhm.
no one's mowing their lawn outside or practicing drums in the next house, or, you know what I mean? Like,
And you're speaking clearly and closely into the microphone. I think that's what's most important here.
totally.
I am awful about that. I always speak too quickly and I always just veer off from a microphone. Or I start going like this, and it's an audio podcast and no one can hear this. Do we have any other questions for Ellis or on this topic of starting your own?
One quick thing I want to add, short form video is like the best, in my opinion, to market your podcast because people can share that. Those tips can go viral and people will listen to your show that way. So YouTube shorts, reels, TikTok.
Absolutely. I think that's great because video is just so, I would also add as an option when you get to that point where you're doing that short form, having like text captions sometimes can be extremely helpful for grabbing attention. Steph, tell us all about monetization.
I'll try my best here, but monetization, what is monetization? It's making money from your show. We like dollars, we like money, but you got to be realistic. There are so many podcasts out there, so many podcasters. Everyone and their dog has a podcast right now. Okay. So it is not realistic to think or coming into podcasting thinking, okay, I'm going to quit my full-time job. I'm going to quit doing what I'm doing and pursue this full-time because realistically, unless you have thousands and thousands and thousands of followers, subscribers, and listeners, you're not going to be seeing a lot. And I just want to put this out there because as a baby podcaster, I was like, I'm going to make money. I'm going to be like the next guys we fucked. I'm going to be like this person. And we all thought like that, I'm sure. But realistically, I hate to burst your bubble, but it likely will not happen. Even with, huge adult stars that have huge followings and stuff like that, like, sure, they might be bringing in a little bit, but it's not enough to quit your day job. So, and as mentioned here, traditional advertisers, like you need to have the numbers, you need to have the downloads in order to make money off your show. So just want to put the disclaimer on, hate to be a jaded person, but it is very, very true. Okay, but moving on, there are many different ways that you can monetize, and you can actually be pretty creative with this kind of stuff. Traditionally, sponsorships, I know a lot of people, podcasters always want to get that sponsor. They want to get those ads rolling on their show. So usually traditionally, and I'm sure Carly even know a little bit about this as well, but you, again, honing down on, you need downloads, you need a following, and you need the numbers to show it, because usually it's measured by CPM, which is the cost per mile, and that's usually per every 1,000 listens for each podcast episode. So just think about that. You need to be able to have at least 1,000, generally speaking though, to have that many listens on each weekly episode. So that is a lot. So that's really important in terms of you building your following, like Ellis was saying, and like Sinn was saying, to really work on carving out your audience. If you have a niche, then it's really great to really focus on that because, again, hopefully more people will be listening and tuning in. So besides traditional ads, and you can also go a different route in terms of like working with smaller businesses and stuff I'll mention later on as well, but there's different ways to kind of structure that. For now, we'll kind of talk about maybe some areas that are within reach a little bit easier for your show. So I know that Ellis mentioning Spotify for podcasters, formerly known as Anchor. That is a free podcasting platform. They also encourage you to recruit more people to podcast with them. So I think you're still able to do that in terms of like putting one of their ads up on your show, and you can kind of gain money from that. You do that. There's also the donation-based route you can go as well. So the reason I started my Patreon season 4 and onwards was because I kept getting folks asking me, hey, Sia, where can I send donations to? Like, I really enjoy your show. It's been such a great, useful resource for me, but I don't see any like public links available for you. Where can you donate money? So I started to start a Patreon a few years ago, and that is a tiered subscription tiered subscription service, and you're welcome to choose any kind of dollar format from there. Mine is personally kept really low. So I did $4, $10, and I think $13 worth the tiers. And each tier has different things that you can kind of unlock. So say the lowest tier is you just get some access to bonus episodes. You get access to discussing future episodes, potential guests I might bring on, and whatnot. And then tier 2 is like people get access to the video exclusive access earlier than anyone would have. So like before the public, because you want to be able to incentivize your fans, your guests, to make sure that they are getting some value out of, you know, this monetary monthly subscription. And then for myself, for the third tier, I think they have like access to my OnlyFans and some other extra bonus material as well. But it doesn't have to be limited to that. You can go ahead and structure that however you'd like, whether you want to do extra clips, raw footage, any other things that you want to include is completely up to you. Another one I want to mention would be brand partnerships. So I have been approached by a few brands, which has been really nice, rewarding, and validating, because you never know who's listening to your show, depending on like how much time you've been doing your show. But getting approached by brands is always a fun and exciting time, I would just say. And these partnerships can vary from anything from few $100s here to thousands of dollars, and depending on the length of time or depending on the partnership that you discuss. This is completely subjective. I do want to say for this part, because I can't really give super specific things on this, but I really want to hone in the fact that make sure that the brand that you're partnering is also in line with what your brand is. I can't stress enough like hearing some shows that I'm just like, what is this ad doing here? Like, what is this? Like, why do I want like this shaving kit? Like super random stuff. And it's very strange, but then I understand, because I know like people are getting paid for that stuff. But I personally believe that it's really important to make sure everything would be a correct fit for you and your show, and also your listeners as well. Lastly would be affiliate marketing. So for example, sex toy company wants to partner with you, or hey, I want to send you this product so you can test it out, and can you say like a nice little review on your website or on your social media or on your show, like a nice, like a smaller ad as well. Those are totally fine as well. That usually is in the form of like discount code. So use stripped 50 for 50% off, or use stripped by Sia 10 for 10% off, or blah, 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 stuff like that. And you get a small kickback of that back to you. So that can be an option. I just personally find, again, limiting the amount of sponsors or ads on your show, because as a listener, if I'm having to hear 5 different commercial ads, like it's not an enjoyable listening experience for me. I've personally unsubscribed for podcasts because it's just, I just am constantly skipping, and there's no, or sometimes you can't skip it and you're like, where is the ad coming? Like it's not enjoyable anymore. So FYI, those are just a few different ways that you can monetize. Also want to mention, if you are a bigger podcast, then looping in your merchandise can also be a really, really great way to monetize as well. I'm small and I'm an indie podcast, so I'm just not personally at that point, but maybe some of you guys are. So yeah, another big point in terms of monetization and just in general would be community engagement. And then again, my shows were really specific in terms of like getting in touch with the sex worker community, and also really fighting to destigmatize, educate, and humanize sex workers. So that is like the point of my show specifically. But it's whatever community that you're wanting to engage with. Maybe you're really wanting to do a podcast on BDSM, or maybe like the furry crowd, or like something that's super, super niche. I actually think having podcasts in super niche areas is actually such a great idea. And you can probably get a lot more listeners and grow faster as well, versus something that's super general. That aside, any kind of topic that you want to choose. I think it's really important that you're engaging with the community that you're embedding yourself in. It really helps build connection, support. There's usually a lot of different small businesses within these sectors as well. And that's also like another way that I was able to even partner with small business and companies locally where I am in Vancouver, Canada, talking to local businesses and also help uplifting them, also for them being in line with, destigmatizing sex work. When you're aligned on so many things, usually it's almost a quote unquote like easier way to approach a business rather than going to a large company and being intimidated, having to provide your media kit, all these numbers, et cetera, et cetera. Sometimes, at least in my experience, going the small business route is actually has been a little more rewarding and more successful in that way, because they're like, hey, it's free ads, it's free commercials, free ads, like why not? So those are different ways that you can kind of get involved there. And speaking of media kits, again, this is really great if you're wanting to pitch yourself to big brands, big companies, and whatnot. It's really important to include these specific things, such as the demographics of your show. So who's listening to your show? What kind of people? What is the age group? What are the genders? Where are they listening from? Like I can tell you for my podcast is usually from the 18 to 35 age range. Gender is mainly female for the most part. Geographic locations, it's Canada, now it's USA, Canada, and Australia, which is really surprising to me. And then Germany after that. So you should really have this stuff, again, top of mind, especially if you're pitching, because basically you will be pitching yourself to companies. And of course, on top of that, you should know what your download numbers are. Again, if you're someone that's brand new, this is going to be something that's going to be ruminating over time. Early stats, they're going to be low. They're just going to be low, and that's just the way it is. But it's really important if you are really thinking big picture and down the line, what those download numbers are, where and when people are starting to drop off in terms of listenership, rankings, if any, and what your current audio size is in terms of like how many subscriptions. And you can find this for most information. You can find Spotify subscriptions and subscribers, and sometimes also with Apple, if you just go ahead and Google it, you can find the stuff pretty easily. And then of course, any media coverage is also helpful. Links or contact information, any notable guests or any episodes that stand out. Those are all great things to mention, because all in all, this is a really great opportunity to brag about all the things that you've accomplished with the show, what you're hoping to aim out of it, and just show off. So really, this is like your point to show off and shine and hopefully get some big fish while you can in the process. So that's kind of monetization in a nutshell. Happy to talk with people in more detail if needed, but if you have any general questions, I'd be happy to answer.
I have questions.
Please. I'll try to answer
All right. So I think you were saying to get engaged in any of this at all, you need to be getting like about 1,000 listens per episode.
For
At
traditional
least.
advertising, that's kind of the benchmark / ballpark estimation that they want to see. And I'll be honest, not all of my episodes have 1,000 listens on it, especially when they're first getting published. But historically, over time, they generally are in those numbers. But yeah, those are kind of more so if you're wanting to pitch to bigger companies, and also because they want to see like, okay, how much,
Of course.
how much downloads.
Yeah.
But
So Spotify and Patreon, I was just, I started the process of getting a Patreon going, and I noticed that they do this thing where it kind of like links together. Like I started on Patreon and they were like, are you also on Spotify? And I said, yeah. And I opened another window and it was like, well, just finish signing up for Patreon, like through Spotify. Are you aware of this or?
No, this is a new thing. I started
okay.
a few years ago, so I've never had that.
Okay.
Maybe I'll have to double check that. But I will say for adult creators, You have to, if you do adult content and adult, any kind of subjective matter, you will have to consent to certain things and their terms of services, as most adult creators would have to do on lots of platforms, but just want to throw that out there as well.
Yeah, I just figured that was pretty standard issue for every platform we're on at all.
Yeah.
But I thought when it came to the content, like it's not like we're sitting there acting out sex. We're just having conversations about it using explicit language. Like that's okay, right? For Patreon?
Yeah, it's okay. Like I haven't had any, knock on wood, I haven't had any problems in the past few years at all. So that has
Yeah.
been okay. I also forgot to mention another way to monetize was through paid subscriptions as well. And you can do that also through Spotify. If you want to do Spotify exclusive episodes, you could also do that as like if you have like a nice niche community, you could also kind of do it that way as well. Lots of things you can do in
Okay.
Spotify. We're not sponsored by Spotify.
Yeah, no one is. Okay, but as far as you talked about brands, like can we approach a brand? Like I've been really eyeballing, Adam and Eve has ads all the time, and I'm like, I have to find how to contact them to ask about this, but is that where I would make like a media kit, or
Yeah, I would
like
always
how do you suggest that?
I would also have a media kit prepared for any kind of pitch for anything. It doesn't have to just be brand partnerships and whatnot, but you'd probably have to find the person or the contact person who's in charge of their community partnerships, brand partnerships, or someone in marketing, because that is going to be the person you're going to want to talk to for sure.
Yeah, but so how do I find that person?
That I do not know. You might have to do an introduction or do some really good sleuthing on LinkedIn.
Googling. Oh, LinkedIn. Okay.
Yeah, you gotta really, one of the good tips is you put like media contact or whatever, and then you put in quotes at whatever that domain is. And a lot of times
It
it
works.
will come up, like, even if it's just the
Oh.
convention of the email address. And this is good for business development in general, regardless of whether you're pitching a podcast, whether you're pitching a product, etc. There are all sorts of like little sleuthy ways to do it. You can also just, once you've found like the name of someone, which again does take a fair amount of Googling, you can just guess. If you get a bounce back, you get a bounce back. Chloe had a great question, which is monetizing a podcast obviously takes time.
Yes.
From personal experience, how long did it take to see any financial benefits?
Yeah. If I can speak on to mine, I guess for my first ad, I want to say was maybe 1.5 to 2 years in, and that was through a local company, like a local salon that catered to strippers, because I'm also a stripper as well. And that was like a local thing that they approached me due to a specific guest that they also knew that was also a stripper, that was like, hey, I did this podcast and I heard you on the show, and like, hey, we'd love to try to work together, try to gain more clientele that way. So about 1.5 to 2 years, and then about 3 years for my first brand partnership.
3 years.
Yeah. But
And
I also wasn't looking into it very much either. I was just waiting for people to come to me because I'm also lazy. So
you're weekly, right?
I'm weekly. Yeah.
Okay.
This is, and also I think we're just going to open this up to any questions whatsoever. So Ashley has asked, what are hosts like? She'd love to know what the hosts consider an ideal podcast guest in terms of strategies for maintaining privacy if a guest is faceless. And then there are a couple sub questions in there, but let's start with Ellis, you deal with when you interview people, some who are faceless or face in.
What does that mean?
It's face in, and you don't show your face. Like there's a
So
lot
wait.
of full service sex workers obscure your face, so you don't know who they
Yeah.
are. I'm face out. So
Okay.
I've interviewed people who are face in, and then
Got it.
so if I interview somebody that is face in, I mean, this is usually a person who's shown interest in wanting to be interviewed. So in that case, it wouldn't be audio and video, it would just be audio only. So that's what I have always done. And I've also played around with masking somebody's voice or using voice changing software, if that's what they want to do. I haven't done it personally, but I know other people who have done it. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I thought I've heard faceless, obviously, like that makes sense
Oh yeah,
to me,
face.
but
We say face in.
face
usually.
in or face out. Okay, cool. Good.
Face in or face
Always,
out.
always learning.
Yeah.
And the follow-up question to that Ashley had was, and I think this may be just sort of a personal preference, is do you prefer to be pitched with guests coming to you, or do you prefer to really handpick and be on the hunt for your own guests and reach out to them?
Well, I want to touch on what Sinn said earlier, because if the followings like don't match, if you're like a person and you don't have the following to, but sometimes you might have a unique story that might be interesting to an audience. But for the most part, I like to find my own guests. I don't mind if somebody tries like pitches to me though, but there's a way to do it, like we discussed earlier.
Yeah, that's the main thing. Like I mainly search for my own. Again, it's based on people I've either worked with or I am very familiar with or I know. Like that's definitely my starting point. But if other people reach out to me, like I said, I like how you say it, pitch. Like if they pitch themselves to me, but if they just say like, "Oh, you should put me on your podcast," well, then my enthusiasm has already dropped significantly. So that pitch aspect is like a big part of it. I'm open to anyone, but it is like if your follower count is very, very low, then tell me what you have to bring to the table to make it intriguing or whatever. And then also like, with Sia being that we're kind of on the activist side of things. Like I recorded one last week with someone named Mike Stabile. Now this guy doesn't have like a huge following, but he's an important key player with the Free Speech Coalition, which is our industry advocacy group, and he's out in Washington. And like these are the conversations I wanted to have this year, especially before November comes. So like if they can bring something like that, then I'm all for it. But yeah.
Absolutely, shout out to Free Speech Coalition.
Yeah.
Get involved, support. It's a big year. Not to get political, but to get political. It's a big
Gotta
year.
get political. What we do is inherently political. So I understand that some people don't want to go there for money reasons, and I totally get that and I respect that. But like, you should be somewhat engaged right now because this is your livelihood. So
absolutely. And then Chloe had the question that we're gonna come back to. How do you address a guest that is not speaking clearly, has bad background sound? How do you approach it? I think, Chloe, if I may, that speaks almost to a larger question of how do you sort of wrangle a guest when things are either getting way off topic or the sound isn't great, if this is something that isn't like a stop and start recorded, if this is something that you're kind of like, wow, you're off the rails here, like I frequently do.
If I can answer real quick with that part, just the part about the conversation sort of getting out of control a little bit. I don't prepare for my podcast, but I do have a little paper on the desk and I've got my pen in my hand. And as I'm talking with the guest, I am writing down things that they say that I want to revisit. So I'm taking notes on what we're talking about and I'll let them carry on, but then I'll always be able to bring it back either to what we're focusing on or like a question that I had, but I wanted to let them finish. Because otherwise, like I'll completely forget. Like I feel like I did a little bit of that now. I'm like writing notes of what I wanted to ask about the monetization. So I think that like having, even if you do prepare and you have stuff prepared, I still think having a piece of paper and a pen to write so you can keep track of the conversation you're having, the questions you wanted to ask, the directions you want to steer things, you can always come back to it because it's written down. So just for that part, that's my recommendation.
Ellis, do you want to go first?
Yeah, please.
You go.
Oh gosh. Honestly, this comes with experience at this point. So in terms of reeling people in and going off on tangents, I have no problem interrupting the guest. Like, how does this relate to this? I don't say it that way, but I'm just like, oh, okay, so trying to talk about the story and be like, okay, we're going back to this point. I also really want to try to steer them back. And I think that really does come with experience and time as a podcast host. But you should also kind of, I always have like a pre-show thing where I talk with the guest to kind of see how they are like what they're kind of like. And then that's usually a good indicator in terms of like, okay, this person might be rambling a lot because this should have taken 5 minutes, it's now taking 20. And giving myself like a mental note. So that's kind of what I do.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I'll say too that even like I do that to myself when I'm talking. If I find that I've started talking a lot and then I'll in my head be like, what was the question I'm answering? And see if I can pull it back up. And then sometimes even if I can, I'll be like, fuck, I hope that I answered the question, right? What was the question I was answering? Like I'll even say that sometimes. And I noticed that too with my partner, he's a rambler and he will, when he does interviews and stuff like this, he will start and he'll go and go and go and go. And I'll be like, okay, but what was the question you were answering? Like always trying to filter back, like to remember, write it down before you start answering maybe. Then you can always remember what you're answering so you're not like going too far off the track as a guest. And the only other question was about like sound issues and stuff like that. This is why I don't do a live podcast. Some people do a live podcast. For me, that's like, oh, the amount of work that would be ridiculous. But, like if there is a mower, it's like somebody else is mowing their lawn, I can't do anything about that. So it's like, are we going to wait? Am I just going to push through it? Is my editor going to have to like work on that? I mean, but if you can say something to your guests, like I would just be like, hey, what's that noise?
Mhm.
Okay, we got to try to keep it quiet at least until we're done with this,
Mhm.
I just got to say it. If it's live, fucking, I don't know, man. Just roll with the punches.
Well, unfortunately, we are out of time, but I just want to really thank so much our incredible speakers today. If you would all like to just shout out verbally where people can find you and your podcast, and just plug you, brag some more.
Okay, so I'm Sinn Sage. You can pretty much Google me and find me anywhere. My podcast is called Sage Advice with Sinn Sage, and it's on literally every podcast platform. And yeah.
Ellis, where can we find Exclusively Yours?
Exclusively Yours podcast, hosted by Ellis Hendrix, is on YouTube and also on Spotify. Under YouTube, it's Ellis Hendrix, and Spotify, Exclusively Yours.
Well, and Stripped by Sia, you can find Stripped by Sia on all podcast platforms, including YouTube as well. And you want to get in touch with me, it's Stripped by Sia on Twitter or X, or you can find me on Instagram, which is Stripped by Sia podcast on IG. Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you. And again, I'm Carly David from PS Group. If you want to get in touch with us, we can be reached at hello@wearepsgroup.com. Shocker, our handle is wearepsgroup and wearepsgroup.com. This has been an amazing podcast. If you want to work with Ellis or Steph, get in touch. If you want us to hire Sinn, get in line because we're trying. So, thank you so much, ladies. You have been absolutely wonderful and super illuminating. And thank you all for coming. It has been a pleasure. So go podcast, go guest, pitch yourselves, and do it appropriately. All right. Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Bye.